Good morning. Today we are going to start reading our Shattered Lives article, which talks about the Syrian refugee crisis, which has been going on for about the past 10 years. It's died down a little bit right now just because the country's pretty much in ruins. Um, but there's many displaced people from that country. And as we read the article, we'll learn a little bit more of the history behind this. And I'll kind of give a little bit of an explanation about some of the things that have happened there. So, we are going to be taking a look at text structure today, how an author organizes a section of nonfiction text. And if you remember, there were kind of 6 different types of text structures. Some of the videos we watched yesterday looked at 5, but there really are 6. They looked at problem solution, sequential or chronological, which is listing things kind of in order. Narrative, that's one that the videos left out, but narrative nonfiction is like a story. Typically, when you're learning about a specific person, there will be narrative aspects to the story or to the nonfiction text. We looked at compare and contrast, looking at the things that are the same and the things that are different. Cause and effect, and then description, like if they're describing an event or describing a settings or a person in great detail. So I'd like you right now actually to switch over to your Shattered Lives article, which you should have already opened up if you listened to direction 1. And you can kind of listen to the audio while I read, and you can follow along on the Shattered Lives section. You should be able to toggle over and still hear me talking. So there will be probably 2 videos of this today just because YouTube usually only lets me post about 10 minutes. So just a heads up. So we're going to read Shattered Lives. Around the world, more than 50 million people are refugees, chased from their home countries by war and violence. This is the story of one of them. So it does focus specifically on the Syrian refugee crisis, but it also focused on what it's like to be a refugee. And if you did your browsing, you noticed there was a big sidebar that was kind of in brown on page 8 called the Za'atari Refugee Camp. And that is kind of a totally different article or about a totally different place and people. But it's comparing this Dania, this main character, her refugee experience to a different refugee experience. So I'm going to start reading where the big D is on page 6. And as I read, I want you to think about which text structure is this first section written in. How does the author organize this information? And maybe why they chose that organizational pattern. Dania and her family huddled in a hole in the ground, terrified as explosions shattered the world around them. The artillery fire went on and on, each explosion inflicting new devastation. Houses and stores blew up, cars exploded, and roads turned to rubble. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm hoping that you were thinking narrative. It was like a story. You could have said description. It was describing the event that was happening in Dania's home, but it's definitely a narrative story. And if you think about why the author might have chosen to start with that narrative story, it's kind of like a lead. It really grabs the reader's attention. In Syria, where Dania and her family lived, a brutal civil war had been raging for years. Dania's father had dug the hole to protect the family during attacks. It wasn't until the end of the day, when the shelling finally stopped, that Dania, her parents, and her 3 younger siblings emerged at last. Dania could still remember what life had been like before the war. How she'd been a regular kid in a regular family. She had lived in a spacious 4-room home with a beautiful garden that bloomed with olive trees, a mulberry tree that Dania dearly loved, and a canopy of grapevines under which it had been the family's tradition to sleep on Thursday nights. Dania looked forward to going to school each day and took pride in the gold stars her teacher gave her for completing her homework on time. But that life was gone. Warring factions were bombarding her village with missiles and heavy artillery. Her uncle was killed when a missile hit the town's bakery. Her school closed after a shell exploded next to it, sending students scrambling for cover under their desks. By the summer of 2013, it was clear that the hole in the backyard would no longer keep the family safe. They faced a devastating choice: stay and risk death, or leave everything behind: their home, their friends, their country. In September, their choice became clear. They fled. So after this first section, I would like you to think about how the author organized the rest of this information. Dania looked at what her life had been like before the war, and then she explained what it was like after the war came. If you notice, that would be compare and contrast, looking at what life is like before and then looking what life is like different after, the similarities and differences. You could also say cause and effect. The war caused these things to happen. So you can kind of argue a couple different text structures here, but you've got to be able to back up your thinking with evidence. We're going to stop here for this video, and then you're going to click on the second video to continue reading our article.